Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
Welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates Art of Living interview series. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and so glad to be with you again. And if the word Viking brings to mind a snarling warrior in a horned helmet charging through a monastery, well, you're not entirely wrong. But what if I told you that Vikings left behind more than bloodshed? What if, tucked between the longboats and the legends, were love notes, doodles, hair combs, and drunken messages scratched onto bark by angry spouses? Well, again, welcome to the Not Old Better Show Smithsonian Associates interview series. Today's guest is someone who's done something quite radical and original with history. She's made the Vikings human again. Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, Smithsonian Associate, historian, author, broadcaster, and the writer of this wonderful book, compelling in every way, titled Embers of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age, joins us with stories not of kings and raiders, but of children, artisans, enslaved women, and travelers. Dr. Barraclough fans the ashes of Viking myth into the warm, flickering firelight of ordinary life. In her research, Smithsonian Associate Dr. Eleanor Barraclough finds a king piece from a board game that becomes a clue in a centuries-old murder. She describes to us today an antler comb that whispers of the first readable runes. She tells us about a child named Onfinn who scribbles out battle scenes, dreaming of becoming a hero, or maybe just trying to stay awake in school. This is history told through the fingertips of those who carved, stitched, fought, and played. The embers Dr. Barraclough uncovers aren't just artifacts. They're memories we can almost hold. So whether you're 50 or far beyond it, and whether you've ever wondered about your ancestors and what they might have looked like or smelled like, this conversation might just change how you see the past. And now, with just the right amount of touching information, let's turn the page with our guide, Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, Smithsonian Associate, talking to us today about her wonderful book, Embers of the Hands, and her upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eleanor Barraclough. Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much. It's lovely to be here.
It is really great to talk to you, too. I'm excited to get into your new book, of course, Embers of the Hands. We'll talk about that. We will talk about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation. Why don't we just start there? Maybe tell us briefly what you're going to tell us at the Smithsonian presentation. And since we're all on Zoom these days, maybe how will you use Zoom to keep our audience engaged?
Yeah, I mean, this is the lovely thing, isn't it? I mean, 10 years ago even, I'd have had to come all the way over to speak to everyone. So it may well not have happened. And yeah, I love the technology. I'm sitting here in a little potting shed somewhere on the outskirts of London.
That's great. Is that your she shed? Okay, good.
Yeah, exactly. It's my she shed. Yeah. So, but the lovely thing is, so what I'll be talking about is essentially these hidden histories of ordinary everyday people that I talk about in the book, Embers of the Hands. But the wonderful thing about using Zoom is that there are so many beautiful artifacts that even within the book, I don't always, you always have this slight fight with the publishers, a nice fight about how many images you're allowed in, because obviously it costs money. So the lovely thing is, talks like this, I can just go wild. I can use as many images as I want. And there are some really beautiful ones, some really funny ones, really touching ones that really help us get to the heart of what it means to be human and what it meant to be human in that particular historical period.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the images in the book are wonderful. I just really recommend it. Thank you for sharing the book with me. Do you have a favorite image? Because so many of them were so good. I loved, for example, I'm looking at the book now, and I found, kind of in the hostile humans section, this beautiful piece of, um, it looks like it's a piece of stone that's actually carved. Maybe it's
Oh yes, that's one of the
gorgeous.
rune stones. Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
got. I think that one's got. It's like it's got Sleipnir on it. I'm trying to remember. I'll just whiz out a shot. I have the UK version here. I think the US version is inside at the moment, which wasn't very smart of me. But the lovely thing is, yeah, then I can look at the pictures as well. I have to say one for me, and it's
yeah,
probably in the center. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so if I hold it up, for
yeah.
me, it's this one down here. So it's probably in the
Oh, yeah.
center for
Yeah,
you as
yeah. Oh,
well.
that's gorgeous. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's
Stone?
gorgeous. It's probably made from antler. It's certainly sort of
Okay.
bone of some type. And it looks like it's a children's toy. There's a little doll and it's got, these little bobbed haircuts. And then my favorite thing about it is, and again, hopefully I'll have this image as one of them, because it really is one of my favorites. But this little figure has got their fingers pressed into the side of their body, and I remember going to see this particular, it's from Hedeby, which is sort of on the borders between what's now Germany and Denmark. And it's in a museum. And all the children who'd come, with their families, whatever, to see the Viking Age exhibits, they were all just clustered round it. And there was just something so touching about the fact that 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years later, they're still all drawn to this little doll. You could just see they were itching to pick it up. So I love that one because there's something very tactile about it, but there's also, yeah, something very human and really quite touching as well about it.
Well, again, thank you for that, and congratulations on this wonderful work. Because as I was reading the book and looking at all of the images, I too was very touched with the humanity and this wonderful title too caught me immediately. Embers of the Hands. I thought, it's a kind of an unusual phrase. It's almost poetic. What was it about that phrase that drew you to it? And what does it maybe tell about the kind of Viking stories that you're telling us?
Well, see, I love that you say it's almost poetic because it is poetic. It's actually from a verse of poetry, Viking poetry, Old Norse poetry. And it's, so there are these sort of poetic devices in Old Norse poetry called kennings, which is sort of like a cryptic crossword clue. So you'll describe something that's quite ordinary by referring to it in a very roundabout, quite poetic, often quite visually evocative way. And that's one of those. So Embers of the Hands comes from a verse about one of the Norwegian kings, Harald Hardrada. He's quite a famous one because he got killed at the Battle of Stamford Bridge in England in 1066. So he's often used as sort of a big poster boy for the end of the Viking Age. But this kenning, Embers of the Hands, it says in the poem, you earned embers of the hands by these deeds that you did. And it means you earned gold. It's this something that sort of glows in your hand. But I wanted to look at a very different sort of, I think preciousness is the best way of
Oh,
describing
that's
it. So
nice.
it's this,
Yeah.
yeah, it's an everyday preciousness. It's the sort of things that sort of we as humans, we have those of our own. In fact, I mentioned this little antler bone doll.
Yeah.
It's exactly that. It's something that fits into the hand, something that means something to us on a personal, emotional level. And so I wanted to tip that idea of what embers of the hands are, something, to be held by the highest, most powerful, richest members of society and turn it into something, yeah, every day and even more meaningful.
Preciousness. I really, really think that's so apropos. And it really did strike me that that these items that you describe, the small children's toys. There's a comb that you describe. There's a love note that you describe. There's some Viking graffiti. For so many in our Smithsonian audience, we might be caught up in kind of this idea of Viking blood and beards, but that's not the case with these people at all. And I wonder, these are tender artifacts, and so it very original work.
Thank you. I'm so pleased. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to do. And
Yeah.
I didn't always find it easy, but it's exactly that we have this stereotype, and it's basically blonde blokes with beards in boats, right? That's a Viking, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And the thing is, I mean, it's important as well not to completely dismiss sort of some of the underlying ideas, because the word Viking, there's an Old Norse version of the word, which is the language that was spoken by the Vikings, Vikingur, which means raider or pirate. And there's an Old English equivalent, Viking, which means the same thing. So when we're talking about the Viking Age, this isn't an age full of sort of purely peaceful farmers all like dancing around maypoles or whatever it is. You know, there is a lot of violence, there's a lot of brutality. But of course, no one is doing that all the time, and not everyone by any means is doing it full stop. And what the Viking Age is about is so much more extraordinary than just that. You know, it's this age of sort of almost global expansion. You know, we get to the point where looking west from the Scandinavian homelands, and we're talking sort of the first raids, end of the 8th century, just to place us, you know, sort of 793 or so. But we look west, and the Norse sort of spread out. They get to the British Isles, they get to Iceland, they get to Greenland. And then around the year 1000, they end up on the edge of the North American continent, and they meet some of the people who live there. And it's the first time that we know, in a way that's properly documented, both textually in the sagas and archaeologically. So the archaeology is on Newfoundland for the most part. But that we know that humans are meeting across that ocean in that direction. It's like that circle of humanity connects briefly, but it connects for the first time. And so when it's such an epic stage that the story of the Viking Age is playing out on, I think in a way it's even more important to say, well, yeah, this is great, this is exciting, but there's ordinary humans, you know, on that stage. Let's look at those. Let's bring them onto the, you know, out from the wings into the center of that story.
Yeah, they're so relatable, I found.
Yeah.
And there's one scene in the book that you describe. Um, a drunk husband is accosted by his wife, and she is telling him to come home from the tavern, and
Yeah.
that was something I just thought that really could be from across centuries. Yet it just was such a relatable moment about these people.
It is. It's a great one. So this one is,
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned Harald Hardrada killed 1066. This particular runestone comes, runic inscription on a piece of wood, comes from Norway. It comes from around 1200. So we're really talking very quite late. It's sort of the echoes of this period in a way. It's written on runes, that like spiky North Germanic script that so many of us still recognize. It's a very interesting one because, as you say, that word relatable, and in a way it completely is, because it basically these runes read out, Gida says that you should come home. But of course what we're doing there, and it's found in Bergen, in Norway, down by the harbour, in an area that there seems to have been lots of drinking going on, lots of taverns, lots of pubs. So we can sort of fill in the gaps. And so it's, okay, look, this is likely what might be happening here. Exactly as you say, a wife is calling her husband home from the pub. And it's even funnier because on the other side, someone's tried to carve runes, but they're completely indecipherable. And so you just imagine the equivalent of a drunken text message, someone sending it back. And what actually gets to the other person is complete garbage. But on the other hand, we are always having to fill in gaps. And it's that recognition that I think is really important, that these people were humans just like we're humans, but they were humans living in a very different social, cultural, historical context, one where life was often sort of a lot cheaper, a lot shorter. And that's really important to remember as well, that yes, like us, and it's almost like you reach out in time, you almost can touch them, but there's always going to be a gap. And that gap is that part of the unknowing. I like that unknowing. I like the mystery of that,
Tell us about runes, because as I was reading through and I looked this up, I mean, it's almost akin to Roman numerals. Is that at a close approximation? And What's cooler to write in, Roman numerals or rune?
I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they thought exactly the same. And the Roman connection is a really interesting one. So I think if you hold up, we can have a look. We can see which you've got runic inscriptions on the US cover. I stupidly, as I say, now I've got some on here. So you've got you've got that comb on the right. Well, so we should say on the left, there are runes on a little metal hammer. It's a Thor's hammer. And the runes just say, this is a hammer, which is brilliant. On the right, though, what you've got there, and I have this version on the UK version of the cover as well, is we have the earliest runic inscriptions that we can decipher. And it says something like Harja, which might mean sort of, it's possibly something to do with war or sort of military society. It might be a tribal name. It might be a personal name. What's interesting is that those runes, that comb, was found in a bog with all sorts of other gear that had been sacrificed in Denmark. But it comes from centuries before the Viking Age. It comes from around the 2nd century, sort of 160 or so. And it comes in a context that shows a lot of contact with the Roman Empire, which at that point is sort of at its height. And it looks like there are sort of auxiliaries, essentially, coming from southern Scandinavia, taking part in sort of whatever's going on in the Roman Empire, acting as mercenaries there, then coming back home and bringing elements of that Roman cultural world. And so it's possible that this is where runes start. They start as a response to the Latin alphabet. And that's why actually you can see so many of them look quite similar. It's almost recognizable to anyone who can sort of read in or write with the Latin alphabet now. Mm-hmm. But they start off, you said cool, and they start off as something elite, quite secret. Rune may mean sort of hidden thing, secret thing. And so they start off, exactly that. It's something cool. It's something for people in the know. But we've already mentioned Gyða and possibly her drunk husband in Bergen in around 1200. So by the time it gets to that point, everyone's using them. And they're using them for all sorts of everyday, ordinary, sometimes very rude purposes.
We're talking today with historian, author, Smithsonian associate, and broadcaster Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, author of the fascinating new book, Embers of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age, part of our Smithsonian Associates interview series. We've uncovered ruins, combs, and graffiti, and already we're seeing just how much more there was to Viking life than longboats and battles. But what about love? What about children, games, gossip, and the quiet rituals that never make it into the sagas? Let's turn now to some of the most surprising and deeply human moments from Eleanor's research, starting with a Viking-era tavern message that might hit a little bit close to home. Please stay tuned after this. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone. Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not All Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Smithsonian Associate Dr. Eleanor Barraclough is our guest today. Eleanor has written this wonderful new book. Congratulations on, again, it's titled Embers of the Hand, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age. You've shared a copy of it with me. It's just wonderful. I just have enjoyed it. And I'm not the only one. You're just getting rave reviews online. I found one that I just want to read because I think it just encapsulates so much of your originality here at this work. Rebecca Ragg Sykes says, a wondrous, gorgeously written book, breathing the Viking into incandescent light. Beautiful and just so apt. And again, our congratulations to you, because I think the book is worth sharing, and your upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates is just going to be fantastic. I want to ask you a few more questions if you've got some time to stay with us.
Yeah.
One in particular that again caught me about just the humanity of these people and their interesting way of interacting with each other, almost with symbolism. There's of course a lot of reference to swordplay, but in one scene you describe a burial, and the man is found, the person being buried is found with a gaming piece in his mouth, and it's likened almost to a murder mystery. And so I wonder if you'll tell us a little bit about Viking life in respect to that, and how it was filled with this idea of symbolism and what that gaming piece might have represented.
Yeah, and exactly that, as you say, I think of it almost that specific scene to give some context. So I mentioned those first raids, so Lindisfarne 793. What that burial actually tells us is how much earlier what we think of as the Viking Age actually starts. So these are the Salmi ships. They're found on the island of Saaremaa in Estonia, and it looks like they're from around 750. And these probably aren't raids, but they are sort of several dozen elite people from Sweden, from close to what's now Stockholm, who are going out across the Baltic, possibly on a sort of a diplomatic mission. They're looking to open up trade routes. They're looking to butter up, whoever's top of the pecking order over on the other side of the water. Right. And within that context, they are killed. They're attacked. There's all these arrows that are found embedded on the side of the ships, and the dead are buried. And we're talking, I can't remember exactly the number, but I think 34 or so in one ship, in the main ship. And then next to that ship, there's a smaller boat with half a dozen men in there, still sort of sitting up as if they're going to row, maybe into the next world. And the figure that you mention, it looks like he's the leader. And there are several reasons that people think that, not least because he's surrounded by the highest status goods, swords and treasure, but there's all sorts of things. There's hunting birds, there's hunting dogs that have been sacrificed to join their masters in the next life, and then there's this gaming piece in his mouth. But it's not just any gaming piece. This is the king piece of the most popular Viking Age game called Hnefatafl, where you have the king in the center. It's a board game. Mm-hmm. And then he's surrounded by his protectors. And it looks like the idea is that he has to get out to the edge of the board without being captured by the other side. And so, it's this symbolic act of storytelling. And the Viking Age is full of storytelling and symbolism. We have to look even just at the Norse pagan gods, the pantheon, gods like Freya and Odin and Thor and Loki, not really a god, but certainly part of the crew. And the stories that are told about them. And in fact, the picture that you chose at the beginning, that rune, it's a picture stone. And again, that picture stone is telling a story. It's telling a story about the afterlife. It's telling a story about the beings that the Norse or the Vikings believed to exist in the world. So it's not just what you can see, it's also that belief in the unseen. And so much of that storytelling culture we see preserved in, say, the sagas and in poems that are written down later. Sort of 13th century Iceland is a big place for writing down the stories of the past, the sagas, the poems. But it's also there in the artifacts. Every single artifact tells us a story. And it's just whether we can find a version of the story that some of these artifacts were meant to tell. And sometimes then it's not sort of, they weren't consciously put there to tell stories, and yet we can still tell stories about them today.
let me follow up on that idea of telling stories, because the Vikings really teach us that we can carry these stories forward throughout generations, and even across geography too. And I think that's very powerful today, because I think we're missing some of that connection, I think, with our past, and it's so available to us in genealogy kinds of work. But this work that you've done really brings us very, very much focused on this idea of these stories that can last, and it's almost as though the Vikings were foreshadowing a future.
Mm. It's a really good way of putting it. Definitely foreshadowing, and it's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because
Hmm.
I think what often happens is the need for people, for cultures, communities to tell stories about their place in the world, their past. It often comes when, for whatever reason, it feels like it's under threat. And that's certainly true of the textual records we have for the Viking Age from within the Norse world itself. And I mentioned 13th century Iceland, and that's when, if people have heard of sagas, for example, so Njál's saga, Eric's saga, Egil's saga, all these incredible tales of the Viking Age past, centered mostly, but not in any way entirely on Iceland. These are written down. They've been passed down the generations. Saga comes from an Old Norse word, at segja, to tell, to say. These are oral stories. But at the point when they're written down, it's the point where the Norwegian crown is looking to take over Iceland and control Iceland. And Iceland is also in the middle of this bloody civil war. And that's the point where their identity is changing and being threatened. And so they're looking to the past to define themselves, but also work out, well, where do we fit in the world? Why do we matter? So I think there's a lot of that. There's one really wonderful example of that. And this is one that it features in the book. I think it's in the central plates. It's at the bottom of the UK version. Again, I know that's not helpful, but just as I have it in front of me, It's a stone runic inscription. And I can try and find it because it comes from Greenland. And it's three probably hunters who were high in the Arctic North. So way beyond the part of Greenland that the Norse settled in from sort of the late 10th century until early 15th century, perhaps. And these three hunters seem to have got lost. And there's this little island, it's Kingatorsuaq, and there are three runes. And this was back in the 19th century. People found these three cairns, stones piled high, and in one of them they found this runic inscription. And the runic inscription says, and I can find it, Erling Sigvardsson and Bjarni Thordarson and Eindre the Oddson built these cairns the Saturday before Rogation Day. And then there's several indecipherable runes after that. Now that's April. That's not a good time for Norse hunters to be in the high Arctic. You wouldn't expect that to happen. They're probably hunting walrus, but it's likely that they had essentially been left there for whatever reason over this harsh, cold Greenlandic winter, and they'd survived until April. Now, if that's the case, what I think is remarkable and incredibly touching is that rune stone, the runes they carved there, giving their names, giving the time of year they found themselves there, not the year itself, we have no idea. That's a form of storytelling, and that's a form of storytelling, a sense of, we exist, remember we're here, and they leave that. We don't know what happened to them. We don't know if they survived, but it's this moment of, we exist in the world. We're going to write our names down, we're going to build these cairns. And it's a form of memorializing yourself. And I think that's a lot of what we see in these wonderful artifacts from the Viking Age, and then in the stories that were told and written down in the centuries where that Viking Age is starting to morph into something else.
Smithsonian Associate Eleanor Barraclough has been our guest today, author of this wonderful book, Embers of the Hand. We will have links to Eleanor's upcoming presentation, as well as her additional work and her book in our show notes today so that you can find out more about it. Eleanor, I just have one really quick kind of final question for you. We know that Vikings, of course, were raiders and travelers, but as you say, they were farmers. They were also clean freaks. And as a clean freak myself, what can you tell us about the Vikings and their attention to attraction and what that meant in terms of status for their time and their day?
This is one of my favorite things about the Vikings. Everyone thinks they're basically smelly, stinky things with flies going around their head. Absolutely not. Clean freaks. The Old Norse word for Saturday is lørdag, well, løgadager in Old Norse, or lørdag today in Norwegian. It means bath day. Essentially, it's this idea that they would have bathed themselves and cleaned other things at least once a week. We find so many combs in the Viking Age. There's a wonderful, it's not a comb, but it's a comb case that was found in, I think, Viking Age Lincoln, so sort of Eastern England, in the British Museum. I always go and visit because it's got runes inscribed on it, and it just says, Thorfast, it's the name of a man, made a good comb. And this pride in the fact. And then what you also get, which I think is hilarious, is when the Norse, when the Scandinavians sort of settle in Britain, in England in particular, the Anglo-Saxons get really cross because they're sexy. And, and so there's letters where Anglo-Saxons are saying, stop doing your hair like the Vikings. And the idea of how you would do your hair, for anyone who wants to know and maybe copy them, it's short at the back and long and shaggy at the front. And essentially all these Vikings are getting very cross, and they're saying, these Anglo-Saxons getting cross and saying, you why are you dressing like these people? This is so unfair. And there's later accounts that even say all the women really fancied these incomers because they changed their socks and they washed their hair, and so that's always my favorite thing about the Vikings, just how clean they were, certainly in comparison to most other people knocking around at that time.
Well, as a clean freak, I related, but the entire book is wonderful, very relatable, very original work. Dr. Eleanor Barraclough has been our guest today, Smithsonian associate. We will put links so that our audience can find out more about Dr. Barraclough and all of her great work at her upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. It's been such a joy to talk to you. You have a wonderful enthusiasm for this subject, and it's infectious. I'm excited to watch your presentation coming up, and I encourage our audience to check it out and check out your new book. But thanks so much for your generous time today. And I'll just say selfishly, please come back. As you do more work, we'd love to have you back and talk more.
Oh, I'd love that. Well, I'm literally in the process of starting the next one. So I would love to come back when there's something to talk about. But thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. That's our show today. Extraordinary insight from Smithsonian associate Dr. Eleanor Barraclough, whose new book, Embers of the Hands, reminds us that the Viking Age wasn't just war cries and longboats. It was love notes, lost games, childhood sketches, and quiet lives filled with meaning. History, as she says, isn't just a list of names and dates. It's a current, flowing with stories, waiting to be noticed, and maybe, just maybe, the hands that held those combs and scratched those runes aren't as far from ours as we think. You can find out more about Dr. Barraclough's Smithsonian Associates presentation and her book at her website, Not Old Better, in those show notes that we will publish everywhere. You can also listen to this episode again and explore our full archive of conversations there at notold-better.com. Follow us on social media at Not Old Better, on Twitter, X, at Not Old Better, on Instagram for updates, behind the scenes, and what's coming next. This is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang. Thanks for spending time with us. Please be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. I hope you'll join me again next time. Thanks, everybody.